Okay, thanks Peter, thanks folks. Nice to be here and very exciting to see all our stars return to Providence. You can all take a picture like this if you want to go to Antarctica. It's a little bit of a schlep, but it's one of the great trips. I'm going to try to really dig into the history a little bit because the history is not very well known. It's rather documented in the John Hay Library because they asked me to send over all the original materials, so they're all filed there if any of you ever want to do scholarly work on it. But this was a very interesting adventure, and I turned out to be a rather unlikely leader of this adventure because most everything that's happened in my career has been totally chancy. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the chanciness and how it actually fit pretty well with Brown. When I was a medical student, I got in trouble in a rotation at the Mass General Hospital because of somebody who had a problem with marijuana. And the trouble I got into is that the patient ran away. And when the resident went in to see the patient, there was no patient. And I got bawled out for letting the patient escape. In retrospect, because there was a big sign on the emergency ward saying addicts shall be reported and included marijuana in the sign, I would have run out too, but I decided to find out something about addiction. So I wrote a term paper as a student, and by chance it got published in the New England Journal. And that's the only reason I'm in this field, not because of careful scientific study or anything, just a chance. I started off in basic science, several years, in a cold room, spent a whole year in a cold room, with a cephalexin, I don't know, in a cephalexin. This is the University of Texas, which turned out to be probably the best place to do this. Southwestern Medical School actually was the best department of internal medicine in the country at the time, so I was lucky. And when I came to Brown, this background helped me a lot because I was at that point doing what was considered soft science, and the fact that I had this molecular biology experience, particularly with the leadership of Brown, who were all basic scientists, actually made a difference. So I could talk the talk if I had to. The other thing that helped was a community orientation. I started a free clinic on Beacon Hill that saw 10,000 kids in 1967-68. And that's how I learned a lot about drugs, because the term paper didn't exactly teach me about drugs. I had to learn it, and drugs and alcohol firsthand. So the free clinic was basically my education. And it also kind of oriented me totally toward the community, which also helped as it turned out. Ended up at the Washingtonian Center for Addiction, which was originally the Washingtonian Home in 1857. And the interesting thing, it was then surviving, the oldest surviving addiction treatment center in the country. It turned out to have status in a very peculiar way. It was in Boston. None of the teaching hospitals, except for the Lemuel Shattuck, which was a chronic disease hospital, admitted alcoholics or drug addicts. So you had the Mass General, you had the Brigham, you had Boston City. Boston City had plenty of alcoholics and plenty of nutritional research. But if you wanted to do other kinds of research, you couldn't find the patients. So that's where they went. So they came to Washingtonian, and we got a lot of research grants. And we published papers all over the place about barbiturate addiction, pill addiction, all kinds of things. And it was this kind of an unusual situation in which most of the professors out of the Harvard and BU system all took rotations through there. So I ended up as the head of medicine there, as the medical director there. And it turns out that when you're doing this kind of work, you go to these scientific meetings. And we had an annual meeting in Atlantic City, really for the basic science, which I was still attached to. And there I met the Brown people. I met at a cocktail party, Paul Calabrese and Pierre Galletti. And they told me that they had a donor that had talked about an interest in giving some money to start an alcohol program. He was in recovery from alcoholism. And I thought, that's interesting, because I'm head of an addiction hospital. And they said, that's pretty interesting too. Why don't you come down and give a grand rounds or something like that, do some medical thing. So it's like a tryout. And I guess what they thought is the Washingtonian Center was like a farm team or something. We'll let them try out there, and then we'll invite them to give a talk to them. So it turns out community health has clerkship. And the clerkship in community health, which was a major undergraduate measure sponsored by sociology and the Department of Community Health, the medical school, sent these clerks around all over the place to learn things. And they sent about, I guess, about half a dozen clerks to the Washingtonian in Boston to learn about addiction. And they'd never done this before. And they got all enthused, very interested in learning about addiction. So if it weren't for this kind of a connection, kind of chancy connection with a party at the scientific meeting, the students coming to Washingtonian, I never would have had a tryout. So I had the tryout, and the tryout resulted in a job. So Paul Calabrese was the head of medicine at Roger Williams, and very prestigious, even though it was Roger Williams, because he was the most research-oriented of all the medical professors here, I think. Dick Carlton had a very special niche, which had to do with the heart health program, but in terms of overall, Paul Calabrese had the most research going, and he was a clinical pharmacologist. That fit pretty well with what we ended up doing. So I ended up as a clinician doing this work at Roger Williams, and the dean, Stanley Aronson, said, well, we've got this addiction guy, we've got a donor, the donor isn't sure what he wants to do, but maybe we ought to get some kind of a program started. So here we are in 1976-77, which is quite a while ago. When I read the story about the 30th, I thought, 30th, wow. So that's what happened. So 1977, they set up a curriculum committee to make a new curriculum at Brown. Jim Abernathy was asking, what are we doing about curriculum? So we keep trying. That's the answer. So 1977, we had this committee, which consisted of people from the campus and people from biology and people from medicine. And that turned out to be very important in terms of our eventual success. Then we decided to have a research symposium. We got very interested in children of alcoholics, and tied up with the Children of Alcoholics Foundation, had an art show and a scientific event on campus, which really drew professors and departments from all over the university. So all of a sudden we had a little credibility. We didn't have a center. Then I said, well, we have to do something with the faculty, because they're all separate. Everybody's separate, doing their own thing. So we'll have a journal club, which turned out to be a complete failure, because nobody could decide which journal article to pick to discuss. So the original attempt to get everything together, aside from a dean's committee where they more or less had to do it, was the journal club, which was a failure. Then we eventually got a center plan. The little secret is that this is actually our 31st anniversary, Peter, I'm sorry. But, yeah. We made a plan and we got a center. Now, lurking in the background, and this turned out to be critically important, because Brown was, I would say, at best ambivalent about this whole area of study, were the donors. Donald Millar, at that moment in time, when he was considering what to do, he had the idea as a recovered alcoholic to donate to the university. He'd been active. He was a vice provost, vice chancellor of Brown University, so he was high up at one point in the board. And he wanted to give money to either Yale or Rutgers or Brown. He hadn't decided yet. I was fortunate enough to have dinner with him, with Paul Calabrese and Pierre Galletti, when I first came to Brown. I didn't know he was dying of cancer, but we had this dinner, and I was sitting there, and Galletti and Calabrese were flanking Millar, and Millar wanted to talk a little more with me. I could see they were doing all kind of things that deans and vice presidents do. And Millar, at the very end of the dinner, he said, I have a question for you. I said, oh, you know, here it comes. And he said, what do they teach you psychiatrists about addiction and about alcohol? He said about alcoholism was the thing that he said. And I looked at him and I said, Pierre and Paul, I said, I'm not a psychiatrist. And Millar said, wow, thank God. Thank God. And he reached over and he grabbed my hand and he said, that's great. And you know, some of my best friends were psychiatrists. My co-authorship in the New England Journal with Norman Zuckerberg was a great psychiatrist. So, you know, I was kind of on the spot. So we went out in the parking lot. He wanted to talk about it more, that there was something other than the psychiatrist that had missed his diagnosis. And that was chance. That was total chance. And so we had Paul Calabrese and Pierre Galletti on one side of the parking lot, and Donald Millar and me on the other side of the parking lot. And Pierre and Paul wondering, you know, what the heck are they talking about? So that was a chancy experience. James Jenks was his classmate, 1919 in Brown, and Millar gave a certain amount of money, and Jenks gave, I think, 3 times as much. Didn't want his name on the chair. Peter is now the Donald G. Millar Distinguished Professor of Alcohol and Addiction Study. And I was the first one, and he's the second one. But that's how that actually came about. Chester Kirk was magnificent. He was the head of Amtrak. He was local. He was in Providence. He was active in national organizations. He was a great philanthropist. He gave to the center every year when it was founded. He gave me $250,000 in one shot for establishing an AA archive and material at the Brown John Hay Library. It was a wonderful experience. I went to Bartinger Gregorian, who was the president of Brown. He dictated a letter, which I signed. The president of Brown dictates the letter. How to raise, I said, how do you raise this money? He was head of the New York Public Library. He says, I'll show you. He dictates the letter. Well, somebody from the development staff writes the letter, hands it to me, I sign it, I walk into Chet Kirk's office, gives me $250,000. And we're able to establish probably the best archive of material about temperance and AA, Dr. Bob's material. Really, Dan Anderson, Ernie Kurtz, a lot of material in the library really helped our credibility. And Jim Abernethy, who's here. And he's been an important donor to the center all the way along and continues to be. Now the core faculty to start with doesn't exactly include our current stars, which is sort of interesting, but it's true. So this is actually the accurate history. Barbara McCready was a key player in the whole thing. Barbara McCready was a superstar. I can't tell you that the Department of Psychiatry recognized what a superstar she was. At that point, Department of Psychiatry did not quite understand the excellence of clinical psychology, to put it mildly. Demi Mayfield was a doc who was doing good research at the VA, had documented how much alcoholism we had there, very innovative, very helpful, and a good medical educator. Al Wesson was chairman of sociology at one point. He was the first chairman of the Department of Community Health. That became important because we ended up starting in the Department of Community Health. Dwight Heath, who is here, Dwight Heath. Dwight Heath is professor of anthropology and well known for his studies in South America about alcohol and drinking problems and heavy drinking without drinking problems. And I think he was, because he told the truth about heavy chronic drinking, he was controversial in the alcohol field. And that made life even more interesting. So since I was controversial trying to do something about negative drug laws, and he was controversial about alcohol, we got along well. He really was a tremendous support for me because I was trying to figure out how to make it work at Brown, and he was inviting me over, and we would have these pleasant evenings where we talk about the power structure of Brown and how do you get along. And I'd say, you know, what do you do with a stigmatized field? What do you do with people not convinced that anything other than the basic molecular biology is good research? And he says, it's about the money. So I think, and Bruce Donovan. Bruce Donovan was a key player, friend of my wife and ours since undergraduate days. We were both Brown graduates, and Bruce had set up a magnificent program on the campus to help students and to work with the health service, and he had a kind of a credibility that nobody else had, and he deserved it. And he sort of fought the battle of stigma, made a group available to students, and he was a role model. Unfortunately, not with us. So he was part of the original group, the original planning. The Brown administration, I talked about Coletti and I talked about Calabrese. Aronson was the dean, David Greer was the associate dean. Howard Square was the president when the center was set up. In those days, if you wanted a center, the corporation had a vote for it, and the president appointed the director of the center. Now it's a bigger university, and I think the provost does all that work. I don't think the president does hands-on meetings and appointing center directors anymore. Howard Square, it turns out, was at Carleton College before he came to Brown, and tried to set up a program like this at Carleton College and failed. And so when we started to talk about it, it really clicked. He said, I always wanted to do this, now I can make this work. So all of a sudden, I had a direct connection with President Brown, and that always helps. Bartender Gregorian later helped me. We had a little financial scrape, and he did something that no president had ever done financially in supporting us, which is sort of neat. He had helped us get the archive, and then he kind of got us out of a tight spot. So they were very important. Now, Center's mission, I think, was made up, Dick will know. I don't think I did the Center's mission with the faculty. I think I just sat down with David Greer and did it. But I'm not sure about that. It wasn't like a consensus, it should have been a consensus process, and it wasn't. But that was the first mission. Now, let me explain. Pierre Galletti was instrumental in our being able to have a center, because the vice president didn't want a center in that university structure. We wouldn't have had a center. So he came to me, and I went to him and said, I'd like to have a better way of working with the faculty. We had tried two things. We tried a journal club, and it didn't work. We also had meetings to decide to use the same intake instrument. So I thought, oh, this is neat. We'll all the research that's going on in all the different places, we'll all ask the same questions, and then we can share research results. And we failed at Barbara Crady headed that, and we failed at that. So we failed at two things. So I asked Galletti, is there something we can do to make it better? Well, the university has a structure. We have programs, and the programs are pointed at one thing. And they had something that eventually an AIDS program was just an AIDS program. We have research institutes. They just have to do research, but they can't do anything but research. And your productivity depends totally on how well you're doing research. And then we have centers. That's the most important level that we have. But then you have to do research and education. And if you don't do both, you can't be a center. So I said, okay, that's what I want. I want to be a center. And he said, oh, okay. Well, we'll give you a plan for a center. So David Greer, he gave me to David Greer and Stan Aronson. Stan Aronson, Galletti said to Aronson, make a center plan. And Aronson wasn't sure what it should be. So David Greer made a center plan. And this was in. This was center plan. And so we need to start out with it. I'm glad Fox is here. We need to start out with it. And Greer's proposal was for $100,000. I got $3,000. Pierre Galletti was very frugal. not only did I get 3,000, but it was split between travel and supplies. And I had to ask permission if I spent more than $1,500 on each category. So that was our original budget. So I have no money. Okay, so what do you do with a strategy with no money? The deal is, you think about the corporation, you think about Brown, you think about the fact the medical school is controversial, people are unclear whether it's going to sort of take over the place. God forbid all the faculty in the medical school would show up at a faculty meeting and vote, and they'd outnumber everybody. You know, so there was all this paranoia going on around the medical school. So, and Dwight was helpful, and Al Weston was helpful. You know, look at the college, look at the college. That was easy. So we did things. Campus departments and hospitals, 11 campus departments, 8 hospitals. We offered expert advice to the health services and the administration when they got in a legal problem, and we said we'd give policy help to the city and the state. Department of Community Health had an undergraduate concentration, which at that time was co-sponsored with the sociology department, and we made this teaching part of that, so we were on the campus. Some of us actually taught undergraduate courses, and then we have the Alcoholics Anonymous and other archives in the John Hay Library, which were important to the university and to the community. So the Brown leadership in total was important. Without Howard Swearing Galletti, we wouldn't have had a center, and without Greer and Bartagorian, eventually, we wouldn't have survived. Now, key players. Now, this is hard. This was hard for me. I could list 25 key players. No question. I could list 25. And these are the key players, clearly. And you know, I put myself in because I'm one of them, but I mean, you want to do the history, but you don't want to leave yourself time. Okay, so this is us. Now, I tried like the devil to have a fourth person standing there, and I'm not going to ask him to talk about it now, but I well remember all my negotiations with David Abrams, and Dick will too, as to how close we came to having Abrams be the fourth person standing. But that's the group, like a troika, like three who made a revolution. If you know about Russian history, this is what happened. Now we did set up a research seminar. Peter, you probably don't remember, and David, you do? Good. This was the first one. It was in October 5th, 1982. And our speakers were David and Peter. The Pawtucket Hearth Health Project was your identification, and Peter was the VA Medical Center. And they gave that first. So we made very good choices. Now the key program, quite obviously, and many of you here would agree with me, was the postdoctoral fellowship program. And the key attribute of the postdocs was quite obviously competitiveness and parties. And we remember both. I mean, the competitiveness obviously was in their grant-getting capability, which continues to this day. In terms of competitiveness, I share with you our triumph and the Jell-O shots. The Jell-O shots was our softball team, and it was a really bad team. And, you know, as I remember it, Jeff Griffin was our best player. This is Catherine Kentz-Wessel, who is this great administrative help for half of everything I tried to do. Pat Clifford, all kind of people. But we lost. I remember the game, and I don't know if anybody's here from that. I remember the game with food services. And I think it was something like 26-3. I mean, it was unbelievable. And there were various injuries. And then we gave ourselves awards, which was really very helpful. And of course, you've seen pictures like this of the various kind of reunions and everything we had. One sad note, Sharon Chauncey played such a tremendous role at the beginning of the program and for many years, and we lost her young to cancer, and that was tough on everybody, and here she is with Rochelle. And Peter and Pat. Peter with his fancy... You still have that shirt? Sylvia? Sylvia, you never saw that shirt before? And there's some It's key to a lot of things we did, and was part of the VA Brown split personality, or whatever, however that worked out, which was important to the center and Jeff in the background. And this is I put this in. I told Bob in the reception that this was in it. I think we're in Breckenridge, Colorado. I may be wrong about the place. We would go to these... Steamboat, okay. We're going, okay. So we're going to this thing, and I'm not sure exactly how the story evolved. Peter knows more about it. But you were on you were rafting. This is where Stout, who was a key player at the center, got injured.
Peter and Damaris made me go on the raft.
We tossed them overboard, we tried to lose them, we pulled back.
So that was our mentor skier, basically. But we recovered. And then our competition went to extremes. And it was crazy extremes. As a matter of fact, some of you may remember what this was. We were building things, and we had to drop them from a height and see if they would break or not, or something like that. And I don't know but anyway, this is what it was. So you had to drop it from the height and see what would happen. So this kind of improved our competitive instincts. And then we had our various scratches. You like that one? You can have that. It's all yours. No, these are, our parties and etc. I mean, let me just say, as I close with one of my nature, it's just a privilege for me, because it was such a team effort. I mean, if you look at the number of people on the faculty that made it work, and the number of people in the postdoc program, and the staff that made it happen, it's amazing. So it was really a team effort, and we really achieved a level of excellence in the research area that I never expected. And Peter's done a magnificent job in moving everything forward. So it's great to have been there at the beginning, and this is sort of what it was like. Thank you.